of fact, in my first academic life, I was a historian of communication technology, and in particular, I don't mean television, film, radio, the phonetic alphabet and the book. And a number of people have made this comparison that when the printing press was invented, they didn't really understand how the book would work, and they had to invent things like tables of contents, indexes, and consistency, dictionaries, consistency in grammar, punctuation, and spelling, and that all took probably 50 to 100 years, depending upon how you count them. I think we're in approximately the same position with MOOCs and with online learning. That is, we're taking the old technology, lecture, and we're pretty much transforming it to be online, but we still don't know if blended learning or MOOCs, and online for me means both of those, so it doesn't mean just MOOCs. Whether blended learning or MOOCs, how to work with or take advantages of the biases of those medium, how to organize them, particularly for MOOCs, how to keep students in them, and how we might use some of the capabilities of social interaction. This, by the way, is a screenshot of edX's very first MOOC, which was Circuits and Electronics, launched in spring of 2012, and the Teaching and Learning Lab did some of the early research with the data that came off of the servers. I had a unique opportunity at MIT to work with a group of faculty, and in the spirit of full disclosure, one of them is my husband, so it gives me an in. He's the old bald guy in the middle, in case you didn't realize that. And back in actually 2001, John Belcher created what was called TEAL, Technology-Enabled Active Learning. This is one of 2 TEAL classrooms that were built, and what TEAL does is it takes the first 2 semesters of physics, which are required for all MIT students, and instead of putting them in a large lecture room and boring them to death, they sit on these tables, these small tables, and the instructor, let's see if this works, yeah. The instructor is literally in the middle of the room. He or she gives a small lecture, 15 or 20 minutes, and then the students sitting at the table have to do something with the information that the instructor has imparted. Now, there are many, I've gone around the world, there are many universities. This was not started at MIT, it was started at North Carolina State. And there are many universities that have now adapted and adopted TEAL-like classrooms, but John was one of the first to bring it to a university like MIT. So we were already doing blended learning in some sense. John also, in the beginning of the MOOC craze, I hope it's okay if I say that, the MOOC craze, created one MOOC for mechanics and one MOOC for electricity and magnetism. Those were running. And then what he and his instructional team did was they migrated all of the resources that had been created on the web for those 2 physics classes, 801 and 802 in MIT parlance, and put it on the MIT X platform. Put all of those resources on the MIT X platform. The MIT X platform is just the local version of the edX platform. And so those are the resources that they put on, and what we're going to focus on is what we call the CAF, the checkable answer feature. Now, are any of you intelligent tutoring researchers, creators, developers? Oh, good, so I can, okay. This is going to seem very elementary to you. So the checkable answer feature is a very, very simplistic kind of intelligent tutor. And that's what we're going to focus on for our research. This is from one of the MOOCs, but essentially they took this capability and again migrated it onto for the on-campus class. So when we did the research for the circuits and electronics MOOC, the green check, which says yes, you have the answer right, became kind of a rallying cry. How long did it take you to get the green check? And so what the introductory physics instructional team did was to take this capability and put problems online with the check, the green check, and the X. Nothing more than that. But what they found was that when they asked the students, and on term in these classes there's approximately 800 to 850 students, when they asked them if they should continue putting 802, which is electricity and magnetism, these resources on the MIT X platform, 95% of the students said yes, we love them. Now, again, I don't know how many of you are educational researchers, but to get 95% of students to agree to anything, thank you, she's shaking her head, is huge. So we knew that we were onto something, and of all of the resources that the students were asked about, these online problems submitted on MITx had extremely favorable ratings. So this means the problems which the students could put in the answers to in parts and get the green check or the red X. They really appreciated that. So as the researchers, were thinking about how do we work with this problem of what is good for online and what is good for face-to-face, the question that bedevils those of us doing research into blended learning, we thought we had a little hint here that this at least was one, as the word that we use, affordances of online, and we decided to dig more deeply into this checkable answer feature. So there were a group of us, my former postdoc, now professor at Purdue of engineering education. We came up with these research questions. We were interested if we could see any patterns of use for the checkable answer feature, and if those patterns of use correlated at all with performance in the class. The answer is yes. The relationship between how the students were using some of these resources out of class as opposed to in class. Remember again that the students are not in lectures, they're actually doing things in the class. So they have access to the resources in class. And can we figure out anything about blended learning based on this one little study? And there the answer is no. So these were we used mixed methods. These were the sources of data. You can see we have both quantitative and qualitative. We have gotten up to the point where I'll report on the interviews. We did a contents analysis of the interviews, and Jen's students are working on the videotapes right now. 30 million browser-side, server-side interactive events. I don't know if that's a lot or a little from where you come from. It's a lot for me. We got a very good response to the surveys. We did 18 interviews, 17 think-alouds. The think-alouds, that's what's being videoed. Actually, it was interesting to me. So we invited the students in the class to come and actually use the system in front of us. And we told them they could either come individually or they could bring their study partners. And almost all of them brought their study partners, which is the the case at MIT that if you're going to get through problem sets, particularly in physics, you got to do it with other people. So we got to watch in real time the interactions of the study groups, and that was how much video. What Cindy's graduate student, and this is her analysis, did was, she's a data miner, and she began to actually, however data miners do it, and I don't know, look at the clickstream behavior to see if, in fact, there were things that students were doing with the checkable answer feature that seemed to lead to better performance. And what they found is when they began to collapse categories, is there were really only two categories of students. Those students who actively and proactively used the checkable answer feature, and those students who didn't, and that the proactive use, in fact, was correlated to higher final exam and higher cumulative scores. One of the things that they found, come on, do it, is when students had, and this is in some sense counterintuitive, but when they had longer check intervals, that is, they would get an X and then they would wait longer until they tried again, that seemed to correlate with better performance. If there were shorter intervals between sessions, that is, you put in an answer to problem number 1, and then you had a shorter interval to problem number 2. You weren't procrastinating, is another way of thinking about that seemed to have some impact. And if the students kept checking until they were correct. Now, they didn't have to do that. They could have just put in something. The way the problem set credit is allocated the number of points. If you get some of these wrong, it's not really a big deal. But in terms of your final grade, but what we found is that strategic spaced engagement with online and also working with other people, feedback is helpful. So that we could see some study strategies in the way the students were using the checkable answer feature that seemed to lead to stronger performance. I watched some of these think alouds, and one of the things, so there would be typically 3 to 4 students working together, and one of the things that I was extraordinarily impressed with, again, just anecdotally, is that if usually one student was running the computer, and if he or she put in an answer that got the green check, then that person would check with the other people in the study group to make sure that they understood why they got the green check. And I thought it was really quite lovely that nobody was left behind. All right, so we're beginning to see, and interestingly, for me as a more traditional educational researcher, we're seeing what the educational research has told us, time on task, for example, or making sure that you actually understand deeply. We're seeing some justification for that research based upon this clickstream data. Students who started the problem set well before the due date, 5 to 6 days as a matter of fact, do better. Now, the research team put together a little study guide based upon these findings for the students with all these nice graphs because we're at MIT. And the instructional staff felt so pressured when this course is going on that they actually never gave it out to the students. From the interviews, we learned that online resource use is mediated by a number of factors. I mean, we know this from technology studies, STS. Previous experience. So the students will try to make a parallel between a textbook and an e-textbook, for example. Or they feel that they have particular preferences. They're not even aware, as I said, that there are all these resources on the course website. So obviously they're not using them. User interface. Those of you who are in human-computer interaction, this will be not a surprise to you. So going back to this idea about in and out of class behavior, still the human interaction is the most important. The students tell us that they can have all the resources online, but actually at 3 o'clock in the morning, they're knocking on their friends' doors. They look at the norms and environment of a traditional classroom setting, like using a textbook, and they bring it into the blended setting. This, of course, will change over the next few years as more and more students are used to working in a blended learning environment, and they prefer traditional or familiar resources over new resources, with that exception, with the exception of the checkable answer feature. That, they said, was new, great, fabulous, and they went to it because we believe it has no real parallel in face-to-face. I mean, it does in the sense that you're talking to somebody and they give you some feedback, but people don't perceive it that way. So here's just a quote that I drew out from the interview. I think the CFA is good because it forces you to re-look at your work. And I think that is crucial, is that when you get that X, you have to go back and look at it. And to Ben's point, you get that feedback immediately, not 2 weeks after you turn in the problem set. I'd get an answer, I'd demo the question, wouldn't have anything more to do with it. Oh, that should be but. By looking at the question, I think it reinforces the concept. Now here's my favorite quote. So we did this in the fall. Me and my friends, now it makes me a little nervous because I'm supposed to be teaching writing at MIT, so me and my friends, that doesn't help. Dressed up for Halloween, I was the green check mark, she was the red X, she had devil horns. That pretty much sums up our experience with the CAF. We really, really like it. We're trying to think about now a way to graphically represent what we have found. And this is just a work in progress, what we've been sketching out is what the students choose in terms of resources, both face-to-face, real, interpersonal, as well as online, is mediated by the time they have, the setting that they're in, and what they're trying to achieve, and then by what we call these sub-themes. This was pulled out of the content analysis. Now again, what we're trying to do is to say, so if you're going to do face-to-face, this is what it really, or face-to-face really does this well, and online really does that well. So, more questions to ask. What might explain the fact that when we saw these students have this particular behavior with the checkable answer feature leading to stronger performance, why do we see that? Is this helping metacognition? Is it that the students have more time to reflect? How can we take this now? I mean, this is one little study, and begin to contribute to the field's broader understanding of what works in blended learning. I don't know if any of you have done any research into blended learning, but basically the literature reviews and the meta-analyses say, we know that there is a little bit of statistical bump if you compare blended to purely online or purely face-to-face, but we have really no idea of why that is the case. And we did a literature review in TLL as we began this work, and for every study that said, oh, it's better because students have to spend more time looking at the videos, we had another study that said, oh, asking them to spend more time is counterproductive. So we just don't know. And then I'm interested in how these findings, that is how the data that we now have accessible to us as educational researchers, help to confirm or challenge what educational researchers have unearthed over the last X number of years.